my brother's wedding, my aunt leaned over to my cousin and whispered, loudly enough for me to hear, "At least Rebecca married well. Poor Margot always had that sad second-hand look about her." I was standing 3 feet away in a bridesmaid dress I'd bought on clearance. My shoes were from a discount rack. I knew it. She knew it. And she wanted me to know that she knew. My father sat at the corner table in his old grey suit, the one with the slightly frayed collar he'd worn to every family event for 15 years. He was eating his chicken quietly, not talking to anyone. Nobody went over to talk to him either. My mother's family had never made room for him at their table, not in 30 years of marriage. He was too quiet, too simple, too unremarkable. A retired postal worker from Akron who drove a 2003 Buick and brought store-brand potato salad to every 4th of July cookout. My uncle, my mother's brother, once called him a man with no ambition and even less presence. He said it at Thanksgiving. My father was in the next room. I was 17. I never forgot it. That wedding was 8 years before my father died, but I think about it every time I try to explain what happened after his funeral, because you need to understand what kind of man everyone thought he was, before you can understand what they look like when they found out they were wrong. My father passed on a Tuesday in March. Heart attack, quick. The doctors said he probably didn't feel much. He was 68. He'd been retired for 3 years, spent his days tending a vegetable garden in the backyard and watching old westerns on a TV that was older than me. He drove his Buick to the grocery store on Wednesdays. He called me every Sunday at 7 in the evening. He never missed a call. The funeral was held at a small church outside of Columbus. My mother's family came because that's what families do. They filled the pews with black dresses and rehearsed sadness. And that particular kind of quiet that isn't really grief, just obligation. My aunt sat with her husband in the second row, behind my mother and me. I heard her tell someone that the service was simple, the way she might describe a gas station sandwich. My cousin, Rebecca's husband, the one with the boat in the second home in Hilton Head, shook my hand and said, "Your dad was a good man, salt of the earth type." He meant it as a compliment. It landed like a footnote. I stood at the graveside in the cold March wind and I thought, this is it. This is how he goes. Quietly, into a Tuesday, with people who never saw him saying the words they're supposed to say. And then a black SUV pulled into the cemetery parking lot. Then another, then a third. They were clean and dark and completely out of place among the modest sedans and minivans of my father's modest funeral. 3 men in suits stepped out. Not flashy suits. Good suits. The kind that don't announce themselves. They stood back near the tree line, hats in hand, until the graveside service ended. My uncle noticed them first. I saw him lean toward his wife and say something. When the service ended and people started drifting toward their cars, one of the men approached me. He was older, maybe 60, silver-haired, with the kind of stillness that made you feel like he had never hurried anywhere in his life. "Miss Carver?" he said. "Yes," I said. "My name is Edmund Walsh. I was your father's attorney. I'm sorry for your loss. He spoke of you often." He paused. "When you're ready, there are some matters we need to discuss. At your convenience, of course. But I would encourage you not to wait too long." He handed me a card. Linen paper, embossed lettering. Walsh and Associates, Estate Law, Cleveland. My mother gripped my arm on the walk back to the car. "Who was that?" she asked. "His attorney," I said. She went very still. "Did you know he had an attorney?" I asked. She didn't answer. That was its own answer. I called Edmund Walsh the next morning. He asked if I could come to Cleveland that week. I drove up on Thursday in the rain. The office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, the kind of office with heavy wood furniture and diplomas in frames and a receptionist who offered me coffee before I even sat down. I remember thinking my father had never been in a place like this. Or at least I thought he hadn't. Edmund Walsh closed the door and set a folder on the desk between us. "Your father first came to me in 1999, he said. He had been deliberate and methodical for many years before that, but 1999 was when he formalized everything. I said, "Formalized what?" He opened the folder. My father, Raymond Eugene Carver, the man with the frayed collar and the store-brand potato salad, had spent 31 years quietly investing. It started, Walsh told me, in 1987, when my father inherited a small amount of money after his own father died. Not much, around $14,000. Most people would have put it in a savings account or spent it. My father opened a brokerage account. He never told anyone. He invested in index funds before index funds were fashionable. He reinvested every dividend. He increased his contributions when he got small raises, lived on less than he earned every single year of his working life, and never once mentioned it to a single person except Edmund Walsh. For 31 years he watched a garden grow in the dark. By the time he died, the portfolio was worth a little over $2.3 million. There was also a life insurance policy, a term policy he'd converted to whole life in 2004, worth $400,000, with me listed as the sole beneficiary. The house was paid off. The Buick was paid off. He had no debt of any kind. I sat in that chair in Edmund Walsh's office, and I did not cry. I didn't have the feeling you might expect, the gasp, the hands over the mouth. I just went very quiet, the way you do when something is too large to hold all at once. He wanted you to have all of it, Walsh said. The full estate. Your mother has the house and a separate account he set aside for her specifically. Enough to cover her living expenses comfortably for the rest of her life. But the investments, the insurance, the remainder, that's yours. Why didn't he tell us? I asked. Why didn't he tell me? Walsh was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he told me once that he'd grown up watching money change people. He didn't want it to change you. He wanted you to build your own confidence, your own sense of worth, without knowing there was a net. He said the net was for emergencies. He hoped you'd never need it. I drove back to Akron in the rain, and I sat in my apartment for a long time. My father had watched his daughter be called sad and secondhand and unremarkable by extension, by proximity, by association, and he had never said a word. Not because he was weak, not because he couldn't, because he had made a choice a long time ago about what mattered and what didn't, and what mattered to him was that I grow up with enough backbone to handle whatever came, with or without a cushion. He was teaching me to stand. He just didn't tell me about the floor. That Easter, my mother's family gathered at my aunt's house the way they did every year. Big house in the suburbs, catered spread, her husband's investment portfolio framed metaphorically in every conversation. I went. I almost didn't, but I went. My aunt greeted me at the door with the same practiced warmth she applied to everyone below her on the invisible family ledger. Margot, sweetheart, how are you holding up? The kind of question that doesn't want an answer. I'm well, I said, thank you. At dinner, my uncle made a toast to Raymond, who lived simply and asked for nothing. People clinked glasses. It was meant kindly, I think, or mostly kindly. Afterward, my cousin Rebecca pulled me aside near the kitchen. She'd been watching me all afternoon with an expression I couldn't quite read. I heard you went to Cleveland, she said, to meet with some attorney. Word travels fast in families. I'd told my mother. My mother had talked to her sister. Her sister had talked to everyone. I did, I said. Was everything? I mean, did he leave anything? She was trying to sound casual. She didn't quite get there. He took good care of things, I said. She waited for more. I didn't give her more. That night, driving home, I thought about what it would feel like to tell them, to say, do you know what that quiet man in the frayed collar built while you weren't watching? Do you know what he was worth? And I realized I didn't want to. Not because I was afraid, and not because I was ashamed, but because I understood, finally, what my father understood. The people who needed to know already knew. The people who didn't need to know wouldn't be changed by knowing. And some truths are more powerful kept inside than announced. But life has a way of making things known anyway. 6 months later, I made a decision that I'd been turning over since that Thursday in Walsh's office. I'd spent 15 years working in non-profit development, grant writing, donor relations, fundraising for organizations that were always underfunded and overworked. I was good at it, but I'd always wanted to do something more direct. I started a small foundation, not splashy, not a gala and a press release, a private foundation set up through Walsh's firm, focused on college scholarships for first-generation students in Ohio. My father had been the first person in his family to finish high school. He used to say that education was the only thing you could give a person that no one could ever take back. I named it after him, the Raymond E. Carver Foundation. No announcement, no ceremony, just paperwork filed, accounts opened, a selection committee assembled quietly from people I trusted. The first year, we funded 11 scholarships. I didn't tell my family. The following Thanksgiving, my aunt had us all over again. New caterer, same dynamics. Midway through the meal, my cousin Rebecca's daughter, she was 17, a sharp girl, curious in the way teenagers are before the world teaches them to be otherwise, said she was applying to Ohio State and was nervous about the cost. My aunt made a sympathetic noise and said that college was a burden these days. Truly it was. I asked my cousin's daughter what she was planning to study. I want to be a nurse, she said, but the nursing program is competitive and the financial aid is, look into the Raymond E. Carver Foundation, I said. It's for first-generation college students in Ohio. The application opens in January. The table went quiet. My uncle looked at me. Raymond E. Carver. That's your father's name? Yes, I said. You started a foundation? My aunt said. I did. Another silence. The particular kind of silence that happens when people are rearranging their picture of you in real time. My mother, who had been quiet through most of dinner, set down her fork. She looked at me across the table with an expression I hadn't seen before, something between pride and something harder to name. An acknowledgement, maybe. A reckoning with all the years she'd stayed quiet while her family underestimated the man she married. He would have hated the attention, she said finally. I know, I said. That's why I kept it small. My uncle cleared his throat. Well, that's quite something, Margot. He was quite something, I said. It just took some of us longer to see it. I didn't say it cruelly. I didn't need to. There was no satisfaction in their discomfort. Or there was a little, I'll be honest, but it was small and it passed quickly. What stayed was something else, the feeling of standing in a room where, for the first time, I was the one holding the thing that mattered. In the months that followed, I learned more about managing the foundation than I ever expected to. Walsh introduced me to a financial advisor who had worked with my father for years, a quiet, meticulous man named Roland, who had known my father since 2001, and who told me, the first time we met, that my father used to bring him vegetables from his garden every August. Tomatoes, zucchini, once an enormous butternut squash. He never talked about the money, Roland told me. Even after it got significant, he'd come in, we'd review things, he'd say, keep it steady, and then tell me about his tomatoes. I've worked with a lot of people over the years. I've never worked with anyone so unbothered by their own wealth. That sounded exactly right. I asked Roland once if he thought my father had been wrong to keep it secret. He thought about it for a long time. I think he was protecting something, he said. I'm not sure he could have explained exactly what, even to himself. But some people understand, instinctively, that the story of who you are is more important than the numbers in an account. He wanted you to have a story of your own before you inherited his. I've thought about that a lot. My father never stood up at a dinner table and defended himself. He never corrected my uncle or confronted my aunt or asked for a single acknowledgement from any of them. He just kept going. He kept his garden and his old westerns and his Sunday phone calls, and he built something in the dark that none of them could see, and he left it to me not as a revelation, but as a responsibility. I am 39 now. I live in a house I bought without telling anyone what I could actually afford. My car is sensible. My clothes are good but not showy. I bring decent wine to family dinners, and I am still not what my aunt would call impressive at first glance. But I run a foundation that has put 26 students through college so far. I have a financial advisor named Roland who tells me about long-term strategy and sometimes asks how my tomato plants are doing because I started a garden 2 years ago. I call my mother every Sunday at 7 in the evening. My uncle, last Christmas, took me aside before dinner. He's older now, a little more tired around the eyes. He said, "Your father was a better man than I gave him credit for. I want you to know I know that." I said, "I know you know that." He nodded. We went in to dinner. That was enough. It was exactly enough. I don't know what my father thought about during those 31 years of quiet building. I don't know if he imagined this, me, running his foundation, tending his garden, becoming in some ways more his daughter after his death than I had room to be while he was living. I hope he'd find it fitting. I hope he'd find it a little funny too, the way quiet men sometimes find it funny when the world finally catches up to what they already knew. He wasn't famous. He wasn't powerful in any way that the people at that table would have recognized. He drove a 2003 Buick and wore a frayed gray suit and never once raised his voice. And when he left me everything. Not just the money. All of it. The patience, the long view, the understanding that what you build in silence is still built, that a life lived without an audience is still a life fully lived, that the people who whisper about your shoes at a wedding don't get to write the end of your story. He just quietly wrote it himself. And then he handed me the pen.